Good evening again. Good to see everybody. Tonight we're going to be playing with the implications of the theory of creative causality to understanding human difference. The question of personality styles, learning styles, psychodiagnostics. One thing I mentioned several weeks ago is that one of the real powers of the theory of creative causality is that it gives a way to look at parts in any kind of living system in more vital, dynamic terms. And that can be parts in the psyche, roles in a family, departments in a university, whatever. And the area of that where the thinking has been most developed is in terms of thinking of personality differences. The basis for approaching personality differences in that way is the notion that we can think of at any point in time human differences in a kind of ecological relationship, like in the available creative whole that exists at that time, that different people fulfill different ecological niches in that. So we can say that basically personality styles are an expression of the fact that we embody preferentially different parts within the available creative whole. Oh, and working with the theory and also simply in working as a therapist, the one thing that's most struck me is the immense diversity with which we do experience our world. I mean, it's amazing to me how different ones of us organize our experience. And I think we miss that very frequently simply because we don't see outside the blinders of our own personality style, or if we do see outside, we simply reject the people who have different personality styles as ourselves as less significant. And as I see it, one of the very important and very rich challenges of our time is to begin for us to be able to really appreciate the whole of human diversity, and so that we don't need to polarize off of other people and reject them as not full as people, and also so that we can have the greatest richnesses of possibility of complementarities in our connectedness with other people. So what we're going to do this evening is basically just make a journey through the different primary energetics, through the basic personality styles as put forward by the theory. A few just stage setting things we should do. One is I might just take a moment in terms of comparing and contrasting a creatively causal view of personality styles to other common kinds of psychological frameworks. I look at most psychological frameworks as having one of a number of common partialities or shortcomings, each of which, looking from a creatively causal perspective, allows us to step beyond. The first of those is that most perspectives are pathology-oriented perspectives. That is, they have some notion of normality, and then there is deviation from that normality, which are seen as problems of pathology in some kind of way. Okay, a creatively causal perspective gives a way to step beyond pathology-oriented thinking, but still think in highly diverse terms. That is, it involves a real appreciation for the fullness of human diversity and for a great diversity of kinds of personality styles, and it is able to acknowledge things such as symptoms, but frames symptoms in quite different terms than we are used to. We'll come back to that further along. Another piece with that is that most frameworks stop short of being comprehensive. So if you look at analytical kinds of perspectives, they tend to do very well at depicting certain kinds of personality structures. If you look at a more Jungian kind of approach, Jungians tend to be very good at talking about certain kind of personality styles, not very well at addressing other kinds of personality styles at all. Behaviorists can talk about certain kinds of things, humanists others, transpersonalists others. But it is very rare that there is a framework that really seems to somehow grasp the whole ball of wax. And at least through my eyes, the theory does a good job of grasping the whole of diversity. But of course, those are my eyes, so it must be you who judges, in fact, whether it's able to do that or not. The other piece is that most kinds of frameworks that in any way are comprehensive tend not to be dynamically based frameworks. That is, they don't really tell us anything about underlying process. They're just sort of empirical crazy quilt accumulations of personality style, for example, like DSM-3 is. And one of the important pieces with a creatively causal perspective is that its basis is the question of how does this person organize their experience of himself and the world. So simply by understanding the personality style within the larger framework, it allows you to understand what's particularly rich in that personality style, partiality within that personality style, and also what are going to be the creative edges for growth for that person within that personality style. Okay, and those are important, I think. So what basically I'm going to do is simply, we're just going to journey together through the stages. And for each one past the preaxial. Preaxial is a bit of a special case, and we'll spend a moment with that. For each one past the preaxial, we'll take a little bit of time to talk about the sort of general characteristics. Then we'll take a moment to sort of make our way around the pie, around the clock of the different facets of personality structure that can happen within that particular primary energetic. So we go upper and lower pole, inner and outer aspect kinds of things. Then we'll take a look at particular richnesses, particular partialities of that personality structure. We'll talk about kinds of symptoms that one will commonly see with that personality structure. And as we've talked about, symptoms are framed in a different way within the theory. Basically, symptoms are seen as simply something that happens whenever a system is challenged to more aliveness than it has adequate capacitance for. It's basically what happens when the vessel is pushed to more space than it has inside of it to what it can contain. And so symptoms in that sense are not seen necessarily as bad. A symptom, in one sense, is an expression that the system is inadequate to the situation, but symptoms also fulfill very important needs, and a very primary one as protection for the system, as boundary making for within the system. What we'll find is that there are very characteristic kind of symptoms that go along with particular personality styles, and those symptoms we'll find are simply exaggerations and extensions of normal tendencies that exist within that particular personality structure. Okay? So we'll talk about symptoms. We'll also play a bit with the question of what different personality styles look like bodily. And one of the powers of a creatively causal perspective is that it's talking not just about how a person thinks, or not just about how a person organizes their feelings, but in addition, how the person's symbolic experience is organized, like what you're likely to see in someone's dream content. In addition to that, it also talks about the bodily organization in that person's experience. So we'll certainly be able to talk about the quality of movement that you're likely to see with a person. We'll talk about just what it feels like to touch that person's skin, okay? And we'll be able to talk to a certain degree about even questions of bodily structure. I mean, a lot of things go into bodily structure, certainly the family heritage, a major part of it. But another piece that goes into our bodily structure, as we'll see, is sort of how we organize ourselves bodily in our own experience. Okay, and then we'll end up, I'll make a few comparisons and contrastings with other kinds of, what other kinds of frameworks might call those particular personality styles. Okay, a few last quick stage setting pieces before we get started. One will be important to remember that these notions of personality structure are notions relative in time. So we'll be talking about a particular slice in time, that is, an adult person in present modern culture. Okay. What we have to say would get much more complex if we were going to talk about other times in the evolution of culture, or if we're going to talk about adolescents and children as well. But the theory does give us a way to address those kinds of questions at the same time. Okay. Another piece important before we get started is that we're very much going to be taking a brief, broad brushstroke trip through some very complex territory. So we'll be talking as if they're sort of ideal types and even caricatured ideal types. An important piece is that, in fact, we all have elements of all these types in ourselves and in various kinds of talents. A common confusion I should touch on first, and that is between the concept of developmental stages and personality styles. Okay. Importantly, we're talking about adult people in present culture, which means we've all gone through all of the stages. Okay. So they're all there as a part. So developmental stages and personality styles are separate concepts. And so there is no sense in which being a late axis person is better than being an early axis person, or being a late axis person is better than being a middle axis person. The better or not better measure in the theory is that of capacitance. That's what measures growth, and you can have a person with the same capacitance within any particular axis. Okay. Last piece to touch on, and that's, to me, just the important awareness that while these are subtle notions, it's also the case that just by the nature of being human, we are all, in fact, very subtle creative psychodiagnosticians already. And it's not a matter of learning so much as noticing things we already know. I think the best evidence of that is how good we all are at choosing our friends and choosing our mates and choosing our enemies as well. And generally speaking, most of the time we choose our friends and our mates within the same primary energetic. And our enemies may be either people who are very, very similar to us that we need to keep at a long distance, or they may be people who are so different than us we have a very hard time comprehending who they are. Okay. Well, let's get started. I'll just touch very briefly on the preaxial. The preaxial is that stage where things are most unformed and most in the mystery and most defined by unity. In terms of a personality style, it's really not possible to have a largely preaxial personality style and function in modern times. There's simply too much of a formed reality to exist in. So when we're talking about personality styles that are preaxial, for the most part, we're talking about kinds of patterns that we call psychotic. And so the way the theory frames psychosis is that it's a final common pathway for a variety of kinds of dynamics that can result in a situation such that the system has a very hard time mobilizing itself into formedness, coming out of the earliest germinal stages in things. And there can be a lot of different kinds of patterns. And the earliest ones are often like the organic psychoses, which frequently it's a biochemical kind of thing that's going on. A little bit less early, something like schizophrenia, and a bit later yet, the more what get called the more affective psychoses, like manias and severe depressions and such as that. Notice there you've got some separation happening. You've got an upper and a lower. We're really becoming close to the early axis kinds of dynamics at that point. Okay. The last thing to say about that is again, the theory, as always, reframes the concept of symptoms. So while often one would say, well, the symptoms of psychosis have to do with the disorganization and breakdown of the system, a critical concept perspective would say, well, yes, and it's a bit more than that. It's expressing the unique reality of that system, and it's also expressing the fulfilling of very important kinds of needs within that system. So You can take a symptom like hallucinations. One can say, well, hallucinations is an expression of a disorganization of the system. And I can say, well, that's true. It's also the case that it's an expression of the unique inner reality of preaxial experience projected onto the world so that the whole world looks that way. But that is how the reality of that inner experience looks. So not only is it how it looks, but it's also a way of establishing identity. It is something to hold on to as that person's structure. Okay? You take something like loose associations, which you can say is just disorganization, I say. Yes, it's that, and it's also a very important kind of boundary setting, because if there's all these loose associations, it makes it very hard for a person to get close to you and know where you are. Well, boundary setting is a very important function, especially at the kind of fragileness that one has in terms of the preaxial reality. So one can look at the symptoms, and go through all the other symptoms in a way. You can look at those symptoms in a preaxial time in a sense as a loss of the psyche, but you can also look at the symptoms equally well as a last way to salvage the psyche. Okay. I think the power in that is it allows one to relate to a person who is having psychotic kinds of symptomology in a way that has a profound compassion for the content of the person's experience, and also frees one to really be able to dialogue with that person in that experience and understand the significance of the cues in that experience. Okay. So we could spend a nice 3 or 4 hours playing around preaxial kinds of dynamics. I think what I'll do is leave that for there. For the rest of the personality styles, I'm going to invite some friends of mine to help me, and because they're more expert on these different personality styles than I am. So I'm going to leave now and simply let these friends come and talk to you. So I invite you to welcome them and appreciate uniquely who they are. Well, gosh, Charlie asked me to come and talk to you folks about preaxial or early access stuff, and nice to see you all. Early access is the stage of first coming to light. It's the stage of the magical beginnings of things in the formative process. The stage that's most in touch with the magic and mystery of things. And in personality styles, kinds of qualities that we're likely to see are a kind of inner sensitivity, often a real spiritual inner sensitivity with that. A real valuing of the creative, in traditional sense of the creative. Often with that, a real valuing of mystery, the earth, nature. Valuing of innovation, playfulness, often. We sort of make our way around the pie of different aspects of the axis sensibilities. We might start with upper inner, early axis, upper inner. And that's the part of early axis that is going to most highly value and most highly embody the part that is within, sensitive, in the light. It's the kind of person that would be attracted very easily to like meditative kinds of disciplines, Eastern philosophy, for example. It's the essence of things that are important. And essence is in a kind of transcendent kind of sense, is really the ultimate value and importance for this person. It's the magic of things, in a sort of spiritual sense of magic, that's preeminent. It lives close in and high. If we move from early upper inner to early upper outer, that sense of magic translates from the world of inner spirit increasingly to the world of outer creation. So this is probably the personality style that tends to be most innovative. A lot of people who are visual artists, a lot of people who are musicians, and if it's quite ascendant, often people who are innovators in all kinds of spheres. For example, Albert Einstein is a classic early upper outer, so the mad professor type of personality structure. Okay. Often quite charismatic as well. This numinous quality about the person. The person brings that magic out into the world. If we begin to move from early upper outer to early lower outer, that sense of magic and delightful improv from above becomes even fuller in its sense of improv from below. A personality style that very common, like people who love to do improvisational dancing. Okay, there's a kind of wildness and looseness that is a part of early lower outer. Often also with that a wonderful rich sense of humor, often a bit on the macabre side of humor. It's sort of the Jonathan Winters, Gary Larson, Robin Williams kind of humor. Let's see, what did I bring this evening? Oh, I brought my favorite slug. This is sort of a Washington archetype for early lower outers. What did I bring too? I brought one of my Christmas presents. You want to see one of my Christmas presents? You've seen these before? This shows that people love me. You've seen these? The gooey spiders. Have you ever watched them? You throw them on things and they crawl down the wall.
Oh my God.
So. So, early lower outer. Well, the upper, in a sense, is the magical child. Okay, this is the part of personality structure that most appreciates the child in us. Okay. The early lower outer is really the wild child. Okay. Now as it moves down to early lower inner, then that appreciation of the child moves to be more the appreciation of the sensitive child. It's the most inner kind of place in experience. I'm going to bring a friend of mine out here. This is Peppo. Early lower inner folk probably have the most richly developed inner world, child world experience in themselves. They're not real apt to do a lot of things out in the world. They're much more likely to be in the home with children. Some of the most wonderful parents for young children are early lower inner people. And my archetypal image for early lower inner is my kindergarten teacher, who somehow miraculously could get 23 children on her lap at one time and read us all Winnie the Pooh. And that's my image of my memory of it. So what are some of the kinds of particular richnesses of early access? And you might just sort of play with it inside yourself and see what kinds of words come up. Okay. Certainly part of it's a kind of connection in the child. Okay. Kind of sensitivity, kind of inner sensitivity. Often an appreciation of mystery, especially with the lower poles. Innovativeness. Often considerable charisma, ability to inspire, teach others in a spiritual kind of way. That's more upper pole kind of thing. How about shortcomings? How about partialities for this particular piece of the pie? Well, certainly one is that this kind of person is enough in the inner that they often have a very difficult time distinguishing between the visions of the possible and, in fact, what is possible out in the real world, which can often get them into significant trouble. They'll either stay in their inner world and not ever get out of it because some part of them knows they can't handle the real world out there, or else they'll often get out into the world with ideas of what's possible to actually do and find themselves feeling significantly violated when that is not a simple thing to do in the world. And not often this kind of personality style has a very difficult time dealing with things that require struggle and perseverance, dealing with details. Also, this kind of personality style often has difficult time dealing with things that demand more middle and late access sensibilities, such as things like simple human relationships with other people. It's like an early access personality style often has a very difficult time, for example, distinguishing spiritual love from human love. They just assume that if one's feeling spiritual love toward another person, that works as love in relationship, and not realizing that it takes some very different sensibilities to have a human connection and work through all that's involved in a human relationship. There's also a personality style that just by its nature has a difficult time with questions of boundary. And that's both its own ability to set boundary to other people. And this kind of person is just not very thick-skinned. Doesn't have an innate ability to just let things bounce off of it. But it's also the case that this personality style equally has a difficult time dealing with other people making boundaries in relationship to it, because this personality style easily feels like the breaking of that primordial whole is an act of violence toward it. So, one place that really crops up is, as I mentioned, this kind of personality style are often absolutely wonderful in terms of the ability to be parents for very young children. They also often, if they're very isolated within this slice of the creative whole, have an incredibly difficult time as children begin to grow up, because they experience the child's movement away from them and movement into adolescence as literally a violation of them at a very fundamental kind of level. And they can be very, very suffocating and undermining of the child's growth, which is very confusing to the child because the parent was such a wonderful parent just a few years before. Okay. So, what are kind of symptoms we're likely to see with early access personality structure? Again, symptoms simply being a response when life is bigger than the person can handle. Okay, what happens? And what we're going to see is an exaggeration of those kinds of personality structures. Certainly with early upper inner, the kinds of things, well, the most common one is just to be somewhat of a space case. Okay, one's up into the ozone. Okay, if one's challenged more than that, more than up in the ozone, very frequently one can get quite paranoid. That paranoid is coming simply that the person doesn't have a lot of real solid foundation and roots. You know, they're hovering up here and attempt to deal with the world in a very contactful way. From hovering up in the ozone, the world indeed looks like it's quite scary and threatening to it. So you can get paranoid from that place. As we move more